Okay, we are now live with the September 6th edition of Prehistory, a Traveler's Guide podcast. I am your host, Greg Nutterman, and tonight we are getting a chance to do over an interview that we could have gotten last week, but we had some unfortunate technical mishaps. Once again, we are welcoming back Meg series writer Steve Alten, and on the panel today, I'll be introducing them one by one. Starting off with Prehistoric Times editor Mike Fredericks.
Hey, everybody.
Next up, will be coming back to join us is paleoartist Joshua Ballze.
Hey, how's it going, everybody?
And also welcoming back to the show is longtime co-host and monster hunter Scott Mardis.
Hello.
And also joining us for the party is good friend and fellow YouTuber and monster enthusiast Ryan George Collins, aka the Omni-Viewer.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni-Viewer, and that's my usual greeting.
Howdy.
And also joining us, we have two special co-hosts with us. On one hand, we're bringing back a previous guest to join us on the panel. He is Ethan Pettus, the author of the ever so amazing novel Primitive War.
Howdy, y'all.
And we also have a bit of a crossover here of sorts. Also joining us on tech support duty is Kyle Byrd from the ever so beloved Kaiju Transmissions podcast.
Hey everybody, it's a pleasure to be here.
So I want to say a special thank you to Ethan and Kyle for joining us tonight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure.
So real quick here before I hand the mic off to Ethan here, want to give us just a quick summarized breakdown of early life and leading up to the publication of the first book, Steve?
Okay, well, the desire to write a book about Megalodon was planted back when I was 15, and I had seen Jaws for the first time, read Bensley's book, and then I read everything that had to do with great white sharks. And there was always a little blurb about Carcharodon Megalodon, but not much had really been written about it. Fast forward 20 years, I'm 35, looking to do something different with my life, was struggling in a job, and in August of 1995, an issue of Time magazine came out that featured the Mariana Trench and hydrothermal vents, and when I read that, I started thinking about that giant shark that I read about when I was 15. And so I went to the library to see if it was feasible that these creatures could, in fact, still be alive, or especially in the deep waters. And I came away thinking that this would not only make a good book, but make a good movie too. And I decided I was going to write it. Because I worked evenings, the only time I had to work on the book was late at night, about 10 o'clock at night till 3 in the morning, weekends. And I did that for 6 months until I had a manuscript, and then was fortunate enough to find a literary agent, and that's how things got started.
I can actually relate to a lot of that, especially the working late nights in the early 20s. It's kind of the life I'm living right now, too.
Well, it's not easy, but if you want something, you got to make it happen.
Oh, absolutely. I was going to ask you, when you started writing the Meg the first time, did you have any clear theme or motif that you wanted to explore, and any kind of message you wanted to impart to your readers through your writing?
The biggest thing for me was that when I had read Jaws, I couldn't wait to get from shark scene to shark scene, but there was a lot of filler in there. And, not that that was a bad thing, but for me, I wanted to read a lot about, the great white attacks. And so when I wrote Meg, I made sure there was a lot of action there, that it was, multiple storylines going on that had action to it.
Were there any literary techniques that you implemented in your first ventures writing? Things like allegory or morals hidden within the narrative?
Well, I suppose the name Jonas Taylor has some meaning to it, as far as Jonas being Jonah for the final chapter of the book, but Taylor being taken from Ron and Valerie Taylor as a salute to them and all their work with great whites.
Huh. I never knew that correlation. I caught on to the Jonas, but not the Taylor.
Again, thanks a lot, Steve, for coming back for us. So a lot of these are going to be repeat questions from the last session. My first question is, your first book, The Meg, like we mentioned, is very Crichton-esque in its cues and in terms of the real-world research about abyssal marine life and prehistoric sharks. My question is, do you keep up to date with the latest Meg research in paleontology? Most notable, the preserved Megalodon verts that exist. There's Meg skeletons that are being found in Peru. There's a new spine that's being researched by a paleontologist, Catalina Payameno.
That's a good question. I had kept up for a while, but not lately, to be honest. My readers are pretty good about sending me stuff that comes out in the news, so I do keep up with that way. But a lot of that territory was covered in the first two books, and so for the more recent books, I'm moving forward in different areas.
Okay, cool. And then my second question is, we actually just passed Memorial Day weekend. So you are actually, not only did you beat out Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible in the first opening weekend, because your movies went head to head, you didn't beat it over the Memorial Day weekend. I think you're still the number 2 spot. I think you earned another $22 million for the Meg movie. How good does that feel after such a long struggle to get this movie made?
Well, it'd feel a lot better if the money was coming to me, but
That's true.
I'm just the author who inspired the book that was made into a movie. But I mean, it feels good. We have to keep going, and I'm hoping that Meg has long legs.
Nice. So, alrighty, that's cool. And then my last question before I pass the mic. With the film being so far from the book, for those who don't know out there in the internet, there is a book. We encourage you to read that book. How do you see things going forward with the franchise in terms of Angel's origins? For those that haven't read the book, Angel is the offspring of the big female Meg that's in the next book.
Well, I've said this on a few interviews, and I'm working on a synopsis of each of the sequels right now. So it makes it easier for screenwriters to understand what's next, because unfortunately most of Hollywood doesn't actually read the books. And I think that was a lot in the case of the Meg as well. It's very important that the producers and studio, whoever that's going to be, is not going to try to reinvent the wheel. Because if they do that, they're just going to keep churning out the same movie, like what happened with the Jaws series. Eventually, I only wrote the one book, of course, so there was no choice. But with Meg, there's 5 sequels and a 6th one planned. And what's important is that the Trench, the second book, it's a much darker story and it's a much more layered story. So there's a lot of things going on. It is important that they stay a lot closer to the storyline. Meg is a great movie, and it's a great way to introduce the Megalodon as a character.
I was one of the few that actually did own the original book, the first edition book, and while the movie was coming out during Shark Week this year, I was going to all the aquariums and the beach, rereading the book in preparation for the movie. So it was really cool for me to read this book and then finally watch the movie we've been waiting for like decades, I want to say.
That would be 2 decades and a little bit more.
I'll go with some 3 questions from different categories here. I will choose a general question real quick here. My first general question for you, Steve, will be, how do you decide on what prehistoric animals you want to feature in your books? And in particular, when it comes to like more recent discoveries like Titanoboa and the Leviathan Melvale whale.
Well, the Trench introduced the first non-Meg creature as Chronosaurs. And then book 4, the House Aquarium, really popped off the lid with everything because that introduced the other territory beneath the Mariana Trench and the Panthalassa Sea, where we now had 320 million years worth of creatures. And the more recent books, especially Generations, with Titanoboa, I had covered pretty much the entire gamut and of the major creatures, the major prehistoric sea monsters. Titanoboa was out there, and it seemed like it deserved a place in that prehistoric history. So, plus a lot of fans had talked to me about Titanoboa in the years past. So it just seemed like a nice follow-up.
I'm just going to be completely honest. Seeing Titanoboa in Generations was quite the surprise, and I actually liked how you built up the snake's grand entrance towards the end of Generations, which I am not going to spoil for those of us that are listening to this. So my second general question relates to the one I just mentioned here. It's about the behavior in the research. How do you go about coming up with the behavior of your myriad prehistoric animals in the books? Do you try to strive for scientific accuracy, and have you consulted experts when you are doing your writing for the books?
No, I don't really consult experts. I mean, I have read, a lot of scientific journals and things like that on some of these creatures, so I'm not going into it blind. But, with Megalodon, I've always extrapolated from the great white shark's anatomy and behavior. The Megalodons in the series, whether it's Angel, whether it's the first one from the first book, their behavior sort of identifies them as individuals. A Megalodon like Bella, who's very violent creature like her mother, will be different than her companion sister Lizzie, who is sort of the brains behind that. So, I try to give them all personalities. The new Megalodon in Generations has its own personality as well. And because I think that's more important for the reader as opposed to what the behaviors of Megalodon. Not that we would ever know what their behavior would be.
Alrighty then. Let's see. I got a bunch of questions submitted by my people, so I think skipping over some of the repeats, let's start with this one. What do you love the most about your Meg line of novels?
I love that it created a culture of Megheads that have become very loyal readers of mine. I love that the books are being read in schools and are popular among teens. And I love that I'm hoping that we have a series of movies coming out.
So here's an interesting one. If you had the money to make a sequel to The Meg, the movie, how would you handle it? And would you make it darker? Or would you adapt certain storylines from the original novels? Or just if you had free range to make the movie however you wanted, I guess?
Well, I sort of answered that with the question about the trench. I think it's important that the next movie... See, the first Meg movie was great in that it established a lot of things where the creatures came from. It didn't really go into too much detail about how the hydrothermal vents were creating this tropical level at the bottom of the trench. But that we can get into that more in the second one. But what's important is that the tone was right. But the tone in the second one's got to be darker. It's got to take itself more seriously. It's got to establish certain things about the science behind why the Mariana Trench has become a tropical oasis for extinct prehistoric life. And it's got to establish Angel. I mean, she's the big character in the series. And she carries the series for, 4 books or 3 books. So, having her, it's chasing a Megalodon across the Pacific is one thing, but when you've got one locked up in a lagoon, a man-made lagoon, that's pretty cool. I mean and she's got a nasty temper. So I think her character has to be established.
Okay. And last one for this round. This should be an interesting one. Have you ever found yourself writing something that seems like a good idea in theory, but yet at first when writing can't seem to let yourself enjoy?
Can't let myself enjoy. I'm not sure.
I guess, like, have you ever had an idea that sounded great, but when you started writing it down, it just either wasn't coming together, or you suddenly realized, what the heck was I thinking, or something to that effect?
Yeah, I mean, I got started on one book. I wrote about 150 pages of it, and it was a vampire story that took place in Africa, and had sort of a different angle to it. And I just didn't know where it was going, so I put it aside. Now I hope to get back to it one day, but because the writing is good, and the first part of it is pretty good, but it didn't take off like I thought it would. And the reason is because I didn't know where it was going. And I normally don't start writing until I know the ending of a book, but in this case, I was still contemplating it.
That does sound like an interesting idea, I've got to say. I hope you have more luck picking that up in the future.
Okay, I'll pass the baton off to Kyle Byrd.
All right. Well, Steve, yeah, I to circle back to the movie a little bit, congratulations on it finally being a thing. And I was just wondering, were you ever able to visit the set, or were you mostly kind of just hands off?
I was invited, but I would have had to pay my own way, and I wasn't about to do that to go to New Zealand or China. My daughter did go with a friend of hers, and they gave her an extra part in the movie, but not that I've seen the movie 3 times and still haven't seen my daughter. So she could be on the cutting room floor someplace. Yeah. But it's not an easy trip for me because I have Parkinson's. So even if they had paid for it, I wouldn't have gone at that point. Yeah. Hopefully next time.
Well, speaking of shark movies, obviously you mentioned Jaws, in the book and the movie, but there is a weird, the shark, they call it sharksploitation, is like a subgenre of B-movie now. Do you ever find yourself just turning on the Sci-Fi Channel or something and watching a shark movie? Or, I mean, is that something that you ever indulge in at all?
Not the stupid ones.
There's a lot of those, I know.
Yeah, the Sharknadoes, I don't consider them shark movies. I consider them just, ridiculous comedies. But I did enjoy The Shallows, and I did enjoy what was it called?
47 Meters Down? Is that
47 meters? Yeah.
No, I haven't caught that one, but I really like The Shallows too. And then, just to kind of stick on that course a little bit, you've talked a lot about Jaws, and you mentioned it earlier, and obviously it made a huge impact on you when you were younger, and a whole generation of people. But for you specifically, what was it about the book and or the movie that spoke to you, that made you say, like, hey, this might be something I want to do. This might be territory or subject matter that I might want to creatively explore?
Nothing at the time gave me a clue that I would be writing shark books at one point in my life, but it was, I write about the stories that I'd like to read. And so, I did like to read a lot about the sharks. As far as Jaws in particular, the book, the attack scenes, those were the highlights for me. Not as much as the other things in the book, but putting 3 different characters out on a boat that's being attacked by a creature is, a suspenseful idea. So I did want to follow that once I did start writing.
Yeah, Steven Spielberg left out a lot of the subplots from the Jaws novel, specifically the adultery and whatnot between the main character and his wife and the scientist.
Oh yeah.
Probably didn't fit Spielberg's vision.
Well, it was filler in the book, but for the movie, it wasn't necessary.
Oh yeah, in the book, it's like the first 2/3 of it as well. I was actually kind of shocked the first time I read it. Peter Benchley's still a fantastic author, though.
All right, I think I will let Scott delve into some cryptozoology here with the Loch. We're going to be talking about the tooth.
Yep. Okay, so here's what I got wrote. The controversial Loch Ness tooth making the rounds on the internet in 2004-2005 has been intimately linked with the subject matter of your Loch Ness Monster novel, as well as the giant eel research of a mutual friend, William MCDonald. The mysterious disappearance of the actual object itself, which prevents scientific analysis to determine its nature and origin, has led to accusations that the object was possibly manufactured as a publicity stunt to promote the book, or that it was not a tooth in actuality, but possibly a deer antler or a crustacean leg. How did this object and the story of its provenance come to your attention initially?
Excuse me. I had been contacted by these two students, and what they were telling me was pretty amazing story, but they had video, and the tooth in the video matched the tooth in the book of the creature that we had used, which, as you said, came from Bill McDonald's research. I never met these guys. I had only spoken to them once. My publisher at the time put out a $10,000 reward for any information leading to the recovery of the tooth, which according to these guys was confiscated by the wildlife officer that came across the dead deer. As far as a publicity stunt, that's a pretty far way to go. You'd have to, because the deer was cut in half, like it had been bitten in half. So, I mean, if you think about this, and I've never been to Scotland, I've never been to Europe or England. You'd have to get a deer carcass. You'd have to cut the thing open. You'd have to plant it on the side. You'd then have to get these guys to find it. And then you'd have to pull something out of its ribcage that looked like a tooth. Now, why would an antler be lodged into the deer? I mean, did another maniac deer kill this other deer and then proceed to be a cannibal and eat it? It sure sounds like a publicity stunt to a certain effect, except when you start examining what would be needed for someone that was working in conjunction with the publicity of my book to pull it off.
Well, according to William,
where do you get that deer?
Met with somebody at the Gatwick airport and was shown photographs. So evidently the tooth was already gone before he even got involved. That's what he told me.
Well, Bill had been over there in the winter of that year. I forget if it was 2004. I think it was 2004 he went over there because they had found some tracks along the muddy embankment that looked like a giant eel had created them. He wasn't over there in the spring or summer or whatever these two college students were over there. He wasn't over there then. So the tooth was something that came out, I think it was in the spring or summer of 2000. I can't remember.
Well, I also spoke to Brandon Kill, who built the giant eel head model. He told me he was given a brass model of the tooth to work with.
Yeah, that brass model was created by a guy named Bill Raby, who's a jeweler. and I commissioned him to create that brass model so that we could give it to Brandon, and he would have something to go off.
So, what are you inclined at this point to think the object probably was, the original object?
Well, if you look at eels, and they had actually captured a big eel, and the guy who captured it was paid $10,000, and that was sent to Brandon. If you look at an eel's mouth, there's teeth that go along the side, but there's actually a row of barbed teeth that run right down their throats. So it sort of creates like a barbed hook effect when it bites into its prey. And that's where the tooth came from. That's what the experts say.
Yeah, they're called vomarine teeth. My last question is, do you allow for the possibility that perhaps both you and William could have been the victims of an elaborate hoax?
Well, I wrote a book of fiction. How was I a victim of an elaborate hoax?
I mean, just the tooth part, you know?
How did the tooth help me?
I don't know. I mean, I'm just saying, you know, somebody could have hoaxed the two of you somehow. But it would have been, as you pointed out earlier, it would have been an elaborate thing to put together initially.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't even know how to go about doing that. I mean, where do you get a deer from? I mean, how do you find a dead deer? Do they just drop dead of a heart attack, and then how do you find one? And then how do you cut it up?
You could kill one.
Oh, all right. Well, how do you get one to kill?
Well, there are deer in the forest around Loch Ness.
But I mean, how do you plan that kind of activity? Do you send out a bunch of guys with guns or bows and say, go get deer, and then go kill it, and then go cut it up, make it look like it was ravaged by the Loch Ness monster?
I actually have a copy of the video where they pull the tooth out of the carcass. It's been floating on the internet for some time.
Yeah, I've seen it. It's pretty cool, actually.
Yeah. Well, that's about all I had to ask you, and thank you for answering my questions.
My pleasure.
Okay, the Prehistoric Times editor will now take the stage real quick here.
Steve, thanks so much again for doing this, and congratulations on not only how well the movie's doing, but how well all your novels have been doing too. It's fantastic. I'm so happy for you. How happy are you? How happy are you with the movie? I mean, a lot of the parts are different. And how much input did you have?
As far as input, when we got the rights back from New Line Cinema, Belle Avery, the producer, and we wrote our own script. And she used that to search and resource the money that was needed, the $150 million, to get the movie started. And she got that by working with Gravity Pictures. Once that was done, that was as far as I got, as far as having input, other than having input directly through Belle Avery. As far as what I thought about the movie, I thought it was a great first movie, and they got a lot of it right. And they got the cast and the characters and the tone and the shark right, which was the most important thing I was concerned about, because so many of the other people who were involved with the years were trying to reinvent the wheel as far as what the shark looked like. And I think recently, Bloody Disgusting News had put out pictures that Nick Nunziata had supplied to them of the maquette that Jan de Bont had created, which I hated. Absolutely hated. I mean, it looked like this shark out of Hellboy. And that's not what a Megalodon looked like. So, that was my biggest concern. If New Line had made the movie, I think it would have been one and done.
Did Guillermo del Toro, was he on board for a short amount of time at some point too?
He was attached to, what happened was, we'd gotten the rights back to the movie they were initially optioned by Hollywood Pictures, which is part of Disney. And then after about a year and a half, the head of the studio was fired, and so the project went into turnaround. and I got the rights reverted back. And then nothing happened for a few years, and then I talked to a friend, Nick Nunziata, who was the founder of Chud.com, Cinematic Happenings Under Development. And once he found out that I had the rights back, he took it to Guillermo del Toro and Jan de Bont, not Jan de Bont, Lloyd Levin, who was the producer. And we met in Hollywood, and they decided that they wanted to move forward with it, so they had me write a script, which once they attached Jan, we worked on it together. Jan was a really good guy. He was very into the movie, so I have no doubt that it would have been a good movie with him as director. But what happened was there were a lot of producers attached who were getting a lot of money for doing nothing. Specifically, Lloyd's partner, whose name I can't remember right now. He was a big-time producer, but he never showed up to a single meeting. But he was taking a lot of points off the back end. So we sort of went into it with New Line that there were too many cooks in the kitchen who were getting a lot of money for doing nothing. and Jan, the production team basically became very divided and weren't speaking to each other. And there was not anyone in charge. So it was Jan and Shane Salerno, the screenwriter, versus Lloyd Levin and Guillermo and Nick. Guillermo eventually stepped away from it, which was a smart move because it wasn't going anywhere. Lloyd was working on other movies. You had the animals were running the zoo, and that's never a good situation. And then you had the producers at New Line, and they had made a fatal mistake. The gentleman who was in charge of the foreign rights, I guess New Line had a string of bad movies come out that lost a lot of money for their foreign distributors. And so the foreign distributors loved Meg and wanted that movie. And so he discounted it to them. And by underselling the foreign rights, he made it impossible for them to get co-financing. So the movie was dead on arrival. Plus, Shane's script was just horrible. It's like Moby Dick for a shark. And so the best thing that could have happened, which was they decided not to do the movie, and that gave the rights back to me.
Yeah, I know you've been going through hell, first with the books, then with the movie, and it's just so nice that it's finally been made, right? I mean, good grief. And I really enjoyed it, too. And, of course, Jason was fantastic, and I understand you're very happy with him in the lead. And I think I asked you before if you got to go to the set, and you said no, but your daughter did, right?
Yes, she did.
And she got to meet him, right?
Yeah, we've got a picture of her, the two of them standing together. And he was very nice and very cordial. And I really wanted to see him out in Hollywood, but we were in two different places, I guess, on the night of the premiere, and I never had a chance to meet him. Belle told me that after the movie, the first thing he said to her was, "Did Steve like it?" So that meant a lot to me.
Absolutely. You'll meet him someday, I'm positive. Thanks so much, Steve. I'll pass on the baton. Thank you.
Thank you.
It looked like Jason Statham was having the time of his life the entire time he was on camera. I'm sure he loved seeing
himself. He was great. He was great. And, the second movie, which, knock wood will happen, I had made the prediction that Meg was going to be the #1 movie, and I wasn't doing it as a bragging thing. I was doing it based upon my 22 years of contact with Meg enthusiasts, and I knew that they would come out in force. But the Trench is actually a much better story and a much darker one, and will give Jason, a lot of rope to play with as far as his character. And I think as good as the Meg is doing right now, and it is doing well, the Trench will do twice as well. I'm telling you, you guys hear it. I'm announcing it on your show. So save this as an archive, and I hope I'm around to see it. but the Trench will do twice as the box office that the Meg is doing, because it's that much bigger of a story if they do it right, which I hope they do.
So, I have a couple questions, but they pertain directly to your writing process. What continues to fuel your creativity? What is currently inspiring you to write?
I have a shitload of bills.
I guess when you get up to your level of publishing as many books as you have under your belt, I guess that's a good inspiration.
Well, the past books don't inspire me as much as my fans inspire me, but you know, I'm not at a point where I'm independently wealthy. I'm in debt, and I need to write, and I need to work, and I'm doing a lot of things right now. But you know, I need to get on with the next book soon. But I did want to mention one thing, because we were talking about the Loch. I announced in my newsletter, which came out a couple days ago, that I was going to, in order for me to write Meg 7 Purgatory as my next book, I need to have another book come out before that. And so I have the rights to the hardback of the Loch. So what I'm going to do is put out a special edition of the Loch, a collector's edition in hardback, just available, not available in stores or not available on Amazon, but like Generations, available only on my website. And that's going to be debuted on October 1st. We're going to take pre-orders for 15 days and then shut it down. And only those people who order during those 15-day period will ever have the book. And they'll get it in time for Christmas. But Bill McDonald had written a book on the evidence regarding the Loch Ness Monster that I had used in my storyline. And I had worked on the book with him, and it features the tooth information. And I think if I can find that book, I'm going to put it in the back of the Loch as a special bonus for readers.
I can't wait to get a copy.
I want to know what inspired me. You just inspired me to do that.
Well, if you need additional inspiration, I'm working on books as well. I don't want to eat up too much of your time. I'll just ask one more question. What do you want your legacy as a writer to be? What do you want your writing to be remembered for, and what do you want to be remembered for as a writer?
I think that I would like to be remembered for someone who inspired other readers to read, especially teens in schools. I'd like to be remembered as writing books that were page turners and were fiction mixed with fact. Just, you know, somebody who's there, who had a good relationship with their readers, who looked out for them as like friends, because that's important to me.
I think that's a great answer, and I think you have a great understanding of what it means to be a creator in modern times, because a lot of people pursue writing to fulfill ego in some way, and it's just refreshing to hear that a successful author wants to be seen as, you know, comrade, ally, somebody that continues to inspire and motivate.
And on behalf of everyone on the panel, we likewise will pre-order hardback copies of The Loch when it becomes possible to do so in October.
Absolutely.
Of course. You know, William basically got lynched by this guy named Rob McConnell on his show, accused him of doing a hoax and said it could be nothing but a deer antler. I felt really sorry for William about that.
Well, I've been on Rob McConnell's show, and he could be a bit of a dick.
Tell us how you really feel, though.
I'm gonna swing it back.
Maybe it was more of a deer dick than a deer antler.
Geez, being a female deer must be horrible if that's the case.
Well, the male sharks have a barbed clasp, so maybe deers do too.
I'm not going to look and see for myself, so.
As a scientist, I find this all very interesting. So, all right, Greg, am I good to go?
Yes, you are, Joshua.
Okay, so Steve, speaking of science and going back to research, one of the interesting things I read in the first book, and it was excluded from the movie, but it was an interesting detail. You mentioned that Jonas brings up Meg teeth that are dated to be younger, that were found in the Mariana Trench. Was this based off real research and actual findings?
Yeah, the HMS Challenger, which I think set sail in the 1870s, had dredged the Mariana Trench seafloor, and they dredged up Megalodon teeth.
Wow, that's really cool. And was that covered by like Nat Geo or Discovery or?
I can't say if it was or not, but it's definitely out there. If you look up HMS Challenger and follow their exploits, they did dredge up Megalodon teeth.
Okay, cool. All right, so the HMS Challenger, and then you went on record. You told us to record this, that the trench is going to be double the box office. So we're making record of that. In the movie, there were actually some Easter eggs toward the other animals found in your books, including the one that's included in the trench. There was a size comparison chart when they first discovered the giant shark back at the research base, and in that chart, there's a Kronosaurus and a donkey, or a Dunkleosteus. Did you have any input with these Easter eggs?
No, I had no input on that. They just happened to use that chart. I've seen that chart before, so I guess I don't think that was their intention. I suspect that they have no idea that Kronosaurs are in the trench yet.
Oh, nice. So it's just a lucky break. I mean, it's a hell of a lucky break. So, all right, that's cool. And then my final question before I pass the mic, what was your favorite moment in the film, or the moment you thought best captured the spirit of your book series? For me, it was the scene where Jonas had to swim out alone to tag the Meg, and he's singing Just Keep Swimming, which I don't know if that was a subtle call to Disney when they had the rights.
I think it was a thank you to Finding Nemo.
Yeah. So what was your favorite moment of the movie?
I like when they submerged below the hydrothermal plume. They didn't give it a great explanation, but they did. I thought that was pretty cool.
Okay, so when they're going through the hydrothermal plume?
Yeah, I don't think that eggheads would understand it, but I don't think the common moviegoer would understand that plume was a layer of insulation created by the hydrothermal vents. That you have this superheated 700-degree Fahrenheit mineral water that is rising and coagulates at the plume, and so it's created this layer of insulation that keeps the warmth in and keeps the creatures alive.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's pretty cool. I remember when I read the Meg, it was kind of my first exposure to the Mariana Trench in this closet bubble environment.
It's a really fascinating way to take the lost world premise in literature and apply it to the ocean. A lot of people just look at the ocean as one great lost world without actually diving deeper into it. No pun intended.
I'm all for the puns. So, alrighty, I'm good to go, Greg. If you want to pass the mic.
Okay, here I think I'm ready to have another go at here. Before I start with my round of questions, since we had a bit of a storm messing around when I was asking the questions earlier, if we could perhaps get a recap about how you started to come up with giving the individual sharks later on in the series their unique personalities, like Belle and Lizzie's symbiotic relationship and Luna's quirks, like her spy hopping, and this is going to be kind of a spoiler, where she kills the Leoplerodon pup and drags the carcass out of the water and displays it to them as if like in triumph, like I can see out of the movie Predator. Okay, going from there, I was curious to get also a recap about shark training.
Okay, which you want me to do first? The personalities of the sharks?
Well, let's start with the shark training, because that sequence with Luna and David was actually very fascinating, to say the least.
Yeah, you know, each of the Megs have had their own personalities, and it's, you know, starting with Angel. I mean, she's just nasty, and but you know, the characters have different relationships with her. Jonas has sort of a love-hate relationship with her, and David, when he, you know, enters the series, he loves her. I mean, it's his shark, but more important, the sisters, Bella and Lizzie, are his sharks. You know, he was there from their birth, and he took care of them. And even though they're nasty creatures, there's an affinity that he has toward them, sort of like pets. Now, Luna is going to take that a bit further, because he's going outside the envelope to work with her. And you know, sharks can be trained. The Navy has trained sharks before, and so I'm not exactly sure where their relationship is going to go, but we'll see.
Yeah, like I said, that's a very cool sequence, and that is based off of real research and so forth. But my first legit question here will be from Hell's Aquarium, and it concerns the Liopleurodon versus Angel battle down in Pont Thalassa. Did you look towards real animal fights for the sort of choreography concerning Angel and the Liopleurodon?
No, I just sort of imagined where it would go. I mean, Angel was the apex predator, and Liopleurodon was just so much bigger than a normal Liopleurodon because of the effects of inhabiting the Panthalassa Sea, where things just got bigger as defense mechanisms over the eons. But you know, they were pretty evenly matched, and I don't want to give too much away on it, but and then, of course, we have Luna's match.
My second question will jump over to the follow-up to Hell's Aquarium, Night Stalkers. One of the overall plots for Night Stalkers concerns David Taylor's revenge quest against the Liopleurodon. Some reviewers have compared this to the overall motif from Herman Melville's Moby Dick. Did the Melville novel have any sort of influence over that aspect of the Night Stalkers plot?
With actually the Moby Dick Ahab sort of revenge thing had more to do in the trench with Jonas, because he wasn't sure if he wanted to kill her, Angel, after she escaped or capture her. But with David, yeah, I mean, definitely there was definitely an Ahab factor involved. I wasn't sure how it was quite going to end until the end in Night Stalkers. But it sort of all worked out.
I think my third question here before I pass the mic off will be, where'd you get the idea to have Angel's litter being able to start reproducing through parthenogenesis? And this has been confirmed to be in 3 extant species of shark: bonnet heads, black tips, and zebra shark, with also being reported in other species of shark.
Yeah, hammerheads too. When I you know, someone had asked a question about keeping up with the research with sharks and megalodons. That was one of the things that I did definitely keep up with them when I read about that. It just makes it's a lot more efficient for nature to just clone females, especially if the sharks are being threatened. And you know, there's not that many megalodons even in the series around, so that made it made more sense to me. And it was also kind of scarier to think that Angel would clone itself.
The only downside scientifically to parthenogenesis reproduction is the reduction of genetic diversity, which could lead certain species vulnerable to disease and so forth.
Well, there's a lot of species that use it other than sharks, so it must not be that big of a problem because I think a lot of insects use it too, and there's plenty of them around.
Okay, here, before we move on here, we gotta give Ethan a send-off here.
Yeah, I gotta run back to the midnight life, even though it's only like 7 o'clock here. It was a pleasure talking to you, Steve, and it was a pleasure being on board, Greg. Hope everybody enjoys the rest of their day, and I hope I can have the opportunity to talk to you all again.
Goodbye, Ethan.
Have a good one. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
I'll have you on the next episode of the show, Ethan, to discuss the latest in primitive war happenings.
Oh boy, I can't wait.
Kyle Byrd is now up on base to bat.
All right. I understand that when you did the later version of the Meg, you made some changes, such as how the Meg is killed is changed, and also the scene with the T-Rex at the beginning is a simulation. What was the reason behind deciding to make those changes?
Well, the what you just mentioned about the T-Rex wasn't scientifically accurate. So by making it into basically a video that played for Jonas's audience, I was able to allow the scene to take place while justifying why it was there in the first place. Regarding the slight alteration in the ending of the two books, I wanted to ground it a little bit more in reality. The first one was exciting and but probably not very feasible, and so I wanted to make it something that would be more feasible.
Okay, understandable. Real quick, I do want to circle back to the Loch, and I know that you mentioned talking to cryptozoologists and things like that, but are you an actual believer in the Loch Ness Monster or any other specific cryptid creatures?
What's interesting is that when I was first asked by my old manager to write the Loch, I turned it down because I was not a fan of that cryptozoology. And it wasn't until I spoke to Bill McDonald and got his take on it that I saw a purpose for the novel, which was to separate the science from the mythology. Because in Scotland, in Inverness, or not in Inverness, in Drum the Drogheda and the Highlands, it's a source of income. It's a major tourist attraction, and so they play up this mythology. But for Zachary Wallace, the lead character in the book, he has to cut through that, mythology to get to the real science to determine what it is that's causing these problems in Loch Ness, causing these attacks, and then there's a scientific reason for it that makes sense.
Okay. And then I do have a kind of an industry question that I was just curious for your take on, because I know, some recent stuff has been released as ebooks digitally, and bookstores closing down and print media, kind of dwindling a little bit. What's your take on, digital publishing versus print publishing, and if there's any kind of pros and cons to each that you might have an opinion on?
I think it's great that people have the opportunity to get self-published. At the same time, there's an awful lot of stuff out there that's, subpar. Mm-hmm. But it's up to the buyer's, decision of what they want to read. So I think it's a good thing. I'm not as happy with Amazon's imprint on the publishing industry. I think it's, I was a big fan of Borders and Walden Books and D. Dalton and Barnes & Noble and Books A Million. And, the fact that their livelihoods are being threatened by a monopoly is concerning to me as an author, as it should be to all authors.
Yeah, luckily I still have a few Barnes and Nobles around me, but yeah, I remember when all those big name bookstores were closing, and yeah, it was a bummer.
Shall let the Omni-Viewer go next.
Let's do a simple one that I had submitted. What's your favorite horror film?
Oh boy, favorite horror film. I have to think about that.
What horror film scared you the most?
I think when I was younger, I saw the TV movie. What was it?
Trilogy of Terror?
No. I want to say Night Stalker.
Was it Kolchak the Night Stalker was
Yeah,
on TV,
yeah, not the series, but the first one with the vampire guy.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And very well done.
Yeah, those are good.
Good choice. Here's one that could be interesting. There's a lot of talk about the first book, The Trench and whatnot. So I had one person ask, what was your motivation/inspiration for writing your third book, aside from watching some reality TV, that is?
There was a lapse in time between the second and third book. Meg 1 and 2 came out back to back, though it was never intended to do that. What happened was Domain was supposed to be the second book, but I had to sue to get the rights back on Doubleday when they had canceled the book 2 weeks before I was supposed to get paid. And so that forced me to go back to the Meg series and get something out there immediately because I was drowning in debt. And so the lapse in time between 2 and 3 was, I think it was about, I want to say 5 or 6 years. And Primal Waters was very much involved with the things that were going on with me personally, as far as my relationship with my stepchildren at the time, who were both teens and going through some rough times, and Jonas and his kids, which were introduced into the storyline. So Primal Waters sort of is a different type of story as compared to books 2, 4, 5, and 6, and 7, which take us down into the Panthalassa Sea. And I'm finding I actually had to go back and read all of my books. I've been reading them over the last couple of weeks because I'm developing a detailed synopsis of each of the books for the screenwriters, if there's interest in a sequel for Meg. And I'm enjoying them, which is good.
I'll just go for another semi-silly one. Which one would win in a fight between the Meg and the Loch Ness Monster? I'm assuming the ones from the respective books.
I think when faced against Angel, the Loch Ness Monster is Sushi.
I would say seconded on that, and also the Queen Meg from Generations. That shark, the Meg that's even larger than Angel that's revealed in the Panthalassa. She would tear Nessie a new one too.
Yeah, that's an interesting shark that I'm going to have to look into developing a little bit, because she's pretty nasty.
Yeah, you don't get much of her, but the little you do get of the Queen, it makes you want to have, well, more of that shark. And I hope she gets a good starring role in Purgatory alongside the Titanoboa Panthalassa. Okay, I'll pass it to Mike then.
Okay, Steve, I've got 3 short ones here for you, but you said between Loch Ness and Meg. How about the Jurassic World Mosasaur and Meg?
Well, that was more of a closer battle, but I don't think there's any doubt that Megalodon is a lot bigger and tougher and nastier than Mosasaur.
And how'd you feel about them feeding it great white sharks?
Kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
If you're gonna, as I said in our last interview, if you're going to feed a Mosasaur, you want to give it, a fatty source of food like a whale,
Oh, yeah.
Abundant, but why would you give it a great white shark, which is a protected species and pretty damn hard to capture anyway?
Yeah. You said earlier that you really don't consult too many scientists when you write your books, and I understand your books are fiction, although you try to be scientifically accurate as possible. I know paleoartists that they want to write a book with their art in it, of course, but the publishers insist on them bringing in a scientist whenever they do it. But you haven't run into that at all? Is it, I guess, different with fiction than with art books?
Yeah, I'm sure it's a lot different.
And last of all, after all the wreckage and death in your books, are you glad that Megalodons are extinct, or are they?
Well, I'm not going to go down the Mariana Trench and try to prove that they're not. Let's put it that way. We'll leave that to James Cameron.
Yeah. All right, thanks so much.
Okay, here, another follow-up to Hell's Aquarium. This is part 1. Did studying the behavior of great white sharks in any way inspire the personality traits of Angel's litter, and also in particular the symbiotic nature of Bella and Lizzie's bond?
I don't think any research inspired that. I think that was more or less a result of Angel's disposition and the fact that she was, and this I go into this more in Generations. That Megalodons were not necessarily bad parents or the females were bad mothers. It was more or less Angels living in a very isolated terrain in the lagoon where she was locked up that made the pups a threat to her because she had no concept of how food worked in her lagoon. So the fact that it was limited made them a threat, and the fact that they were getting bigger made them a threat as well. With Lizzie and Bella, the fact that their mother was such a dominant presence in that habitat, they learned they had a symbiotic relationship as a defense mechanism. And as did the runts, the 3 other smaller Megs that came from the Angel's self-fertilization, so internal fertilization. So they were going to get big as well. And so I kind of explain that in Generations that Lizzie and Bella had to kill them while they were younger and smaller because they knew that they were going to be a threat because there were 3 of them and 2 of the sisters. So grouping all those creatures in one small, refined, confined habitat forced them to kill each other. It was like, I think I describe it as rival gangs in a prison yard. It's survival.
And this also relates to a question I just thought about for Night Stalkers. Bella and Lizzie are shown throughout that book going out of their way to decimate orcapods in the Salish Sea. And I believe this had to do with basically predators eliminating the competition. You want to give us some further elaboration as to how you came about with those sequences with Bella and Lizzie tearing through the orcas? Is there some sort of grudge you have against those animals, or is it just there for the story's sake?
Well, it's there for the story's sake as far as that the Salish Sea was designated as Lizzie and Bella's breeding ground and their future breeding ground for their pups. So, the natural enemy in the Salish Sea is going to be killer whales, which may have had something to do with Megalodon's extinction in the first place. That a Meg versus a killer whale is not much of a match, but a Meg versus 10 or 20 killer whales, that's a little bit different. So Lizzie and Bella basically were there to eliminate the pups' challenges. So
yeah, that's a pretty cool little sequence there. I'll go with another one from Meg Generation. It's a plot point concerning the Panthalassa creatures. in this book, we find out that some of the Panthalassa marine life have a special cancer-fighting enzyme in their livers, which is a major plot point later on. Could you tell us more about this aspect of the plot?
I had to have a substantial reason to get Jonas and Terry back into the Panthalassa. And so the first part of the book involving Terry's medical condition leads to them going back down there.
So will this also factor into some of the plot for Purgatory?
I think most of that's established, but yeah, it'll come back around a little bit.
All right, so I know from what I understand, Purgatory is going to be, your last book in the series. Is there a reason why you decided to stop right there, and what made you feel like, this is where we're going to cap it off?
I actually felt that about Generations, that would be it. But as I was writing the book and getting into the final act, and then came up with an alternative final act, I decided that we'd go on for one more. But I don't want this. I want each book to be a little bit better than the last one. We're certainly on par with the last one. I don't want to, quote unquote, jump the shark with the series because I'm running out of ideas. And I don't want to say that it's definitely going to be my last one, because if I come up with something that's fresh, then I have no problem with continuing the series. But if I'm really struggling to come up with storyline, then there's no reason to continue the series. But I'm not there yet. I won't know until I really get into Purgatory.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, with introducing so many other giant creatures and having them fight each other, essentially, is that informed by anything else that you might be into aside from just general paleontology and animal behavior, like monster movies, Godzilla or King Kong, or did you grow up watching anything like that, and did that inform your work at all?
I grew up watching all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So, there's a place in my heart for that stuff and a place in my writing for it too. I mean, you want to sort of have these amazing battles between the top 2 or 3 creatures and see which one wins. And the Purgatory will set up for that to a certain extent.
Okay.
What's lingering in my mind at this point in developing the plot line for the story is whether I want Luna to face off against the Panthalassa Queen. Mm. And I don't think that really works. First, I would like it to work, but the timeline is too... it doesn't really work because Luna's not that big yet. And the second reason it doesn't work is because that sort of repeats the plot line of Hell's Aquarium, and I don't want to do that.
Yeah. When we first started, you mentioned, when you first started getting to work on the Meg, you did envision it as something that could become a movie, and obviously, it has become a successful film, and, you've even said, you're hoping that it gets some sequels. But you do have a body of work, and like any writer, I'm imagining you're very open to anything being adapted into a movie or TV series. If you could maybe choose, something that wasn't a Meg sequel of yours to be adapted into a film or a TV series, what's the one that you would want to see adapted the most?
Well, I think The Loch would probably be the second one, and that's being worked on right now. They're working on a script. Belle Avery had optioned that one as well. She actually optioned The Loch for me before she optioned Meg. So it's been out there for a while. But with the Meg movie happening, then this ups the ante on The Loch. I'm working on a script for Dog Training the American Male, which is a comedy that I wrote that I think would make a great movie as well. And but I think if you were to ask me one other story that I would really like to see adapted into a big screen event, I think the Omega Project is very cool, and I think I'd like to see that one.
Okay, cool. Josh, I think I am going to pass the mic over to you.
Woohoo! So, all right, this is actually going to be the last research question I have, Steve. So after this, it's going to be pretty science, not so much science, actually. This is an easy one. Concerning your most recent book, Generations, did you do any additional research for your showdown between the Meg and Leviathan, or specifically research into Leviathan Maelvillier?
Most of that had come when I wrote Night Stalkers. The whale has a bigger part in Night Stalkers than it really does in Generations. But it is an amazing creature and probably the closest thing to giving Meg a battle that's out there.
Okay, cool. Like, what about it did you find super interesting as far as, like, the creature?
Well, it had the biggest teeth of any predator, and it was essentially had a bite that was more like a killer whale than a sperm whale, making it a lot more dangerous. They weren't as big as Megalodon, but they were around at the same time period, Miocene. So nice. I thought that played into the storyline pretty well.
Nice. And then my second question is, the last time that we interviewed, a lot of us got to compare our Megalodon teeth. So just to carry on that, do you have a large collection of Megalodon teeth?
Not large, but I do have some pretty good specimens. I have one that's a bottom tooth that's very large, so that's my prized tooth.
How big is that tooth?
It's about 6 1/4 inches, maybe.
Wow, that's pretty good. That's pretty good too. And then the last question was actually a question that you had proposed to us the last time, and I'm just going to circle it back to you, but I'm also going to answer your question. You asked us what additional prehistoric fauna would we like to see written about in your future books. Do you have a specific fauna that you're looking to include in the next book?
Not yet, but I will throw that question back at you guys.
Well, I think my answer last time was a swarm of mega piranha. That was my definite answer. I'm still going to stick with that answer. And then I can pass the mic around to everybody else if they also want to answer the question.
I had mentioned the giant newt salamander type creature Kulasuchus, so I'll stick with that one too.
Yeah, that's a good one. Awesome. What about you, Greg? What's your favorite?
After having some time to think about it, another giant pliosaur species, the one that was nicknamed Predator X, Pliosaurus, whichever genus Predator X was.
Well, actually, I don't really have much else. A lot of the questions I had submitted have already been answered in one form or another.
I think if we're all wrapped up, I'll ask a follow-up Just question. So, Steve, you mentioned that the next book you have that you want to see adapted for a film is a comedy. Are you talking about a rom-com, or is it a specific type of comedy?
Yeah, I'd say it was a rom-com.
So would we be looking at Meg the rom-com? Is that what we're looking at?
No, it's called Dog Training the American Male. It was written under a pen name L.A. Knight.
Okay, cool. Do you have any other books under that pen name?
No, that's the only one so far.
Oh, okay.
I had a good question from artist Gershom Wetzel. I would like to relay to you real quick. He wants to know how can people like him, for example, end up as characters in your books, like the Meg series, for example?
Well, the first step is to sign up for my free newsletter at stevealten.com, because that's where I announce it all. And then before every book, I'll post a contest, and the winners will become characters in the next book.
So all I gotta do is sign up for the newsletter and just go from there?
That's pretty much it.
So
Yeah.
simple. Okay, and this is a fourth question he also wanted to relate to. His question to you is there a favorite moment up until the end of Meg Night Stalkers, no generation spoilers, that you like to see artist Gershom Wetzel illustrate?
I don't know. That's hard for me to say because I'm not familiar with his work.
I'll send you some of his work in a follow-up email after the show.
Okay.
He's a really, really phenomenal artist. And then one more thing. Do you have any tips and advice for anybody that's looking to get into writing?
I think the tip that I usually say is don't write about what you know, write about what you like to read, and then do the research.
I see. Yep, that's something I just saw in an interview you just did.
Okay. Well, I think if we're ready to wrap up, I think the Meg movie is out. Meg Generations, the book, is out, and Purgatory is coming soon. But yeah, I think Steve, is there anything else that you want to plug? Any appearances, workshops, or just any other things you have going on that we can look forward to and check out and tell people to seek out?
Well, on October 1st at midnight East Coast time, I'm going to open orders for the pre-sale of The Loch in a new hardback edition, which, thanks to you guys, you have inspired me to dig out the book that I work with Bill McDonald, The Science Behind the Loch Ness Monster, and that will be a bonus material, 30-page bonus material at the end of the book. And while we were sitting here, I found the book in my archives, and so I am putting that together.
Awesome.
That's cool.
Nice. I'm glad that we helped inspire you to do that, Steve.
You guys did.
Wow, that is an honor, to say the least. Do you have any final things you'd like to say to our audience that will be watching this, Steve?
Just appreciate you listening in, and you can go to stevealten.com and email me if you want, and take a look at my other work.
But anyhow, as the showrunner of this podcast, I'd like to say thank you so much for coming on tonight, Steve.
Yeah, thanks.
Appreciate you guys.
Thanks a lot, Steve.
Yeah, especially coming back to do it a second time.
Yeah, thanks for your understanding.
You're a very patient man.
Yeah. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Yeah.
Good night.
Tip your waitress on the way out.
Go Eagles.
Go Eagles. This has been Prehistory, a Traveler's Guide. I have been your host, Greg Nevin. Have a good night, and good luck, everybody.